This is Education and Transformation Week 3. This is the third lecture segment. And here we want to talk about educators and working with change. And these are sort of quite interesting questions. How do you work with students who are in processes of change? How do you work with students around transformation? While we're working with students and helping them to understand what change is, there is sort of a need for us to have sort of ethical, to be responsible, to actually understand the ways in which this process works. Now, one of the key writers in this area is called Patricia Cranton, and she argues that there is a need for educators working with ideas of change and transformation. She says educators should be authentic and understanding of themselves and should bring that understanding into their practice to enhance their connection with their students. This notion of understanding of yourself is a very, very powerful term. What does it actually mean to understand yourself? To reflect upon and encounter who you are, where you've come from, how your learning has been developed, and what you've got to offer to others. Cranton also says educators who foster perspective transformation have a moral obligation to support those who are learning. So when you're encouraging people to see things in a new way, that new way can sometimes be very challenging, can sometimes be upsetting or distressing, can sometimes be unsettling for those students. And she says, if you're in that position, you have a moral obligation to support those students. You need to recognise why it may be upsetting or distressing for them and support them through that distress or discomfort. And she says also, if educators are to foster perspective transformation among their students, they should also experience and model the process for themselves. You can't foster this process among your students if you do not know what it is, if you're not familiar with it, if you haven't encountered it in your own life. You should be able to experience this and demonstrate your understanding of it to students, to show them what it means to see the world differently, to see the world through a new perspective, to see the world in a way that they may not have seen it before. Now, with that in mind, I want to return to the quote that I offered you in the first of these video sections, and that's this one. We must remember that we're preparing children not simply for employment, though that is important, and for the contribution they can make to the common good, which is important also, but for the difficult decisions they will have to make in their personal lives, in those moments when they decide whether or not to have sex with someone new, to be tempted into drugs, bully a schoolmate on the internet, carry a knife or throw a brick through a window. In those moments, the choices they make depend entirely upon the relationships they made when young, with their parents and their teachers, on their self-worth and their self-confidence. There is no league table for relationships. In encountering a change in perspective or perspective transformation, students require the support of those around them. When they're involved in making powerful decisions, the capacity of their understanding that others appreciate and support them as individuals, recognise them as responsible and effective and involved in major questions. That sort of understanding, that sort of support is very important. So this support that people are looking for, that educators are responsible for from Cranton's perspective, doesn't necessarily involve a counselling situation of this kind that's suggested here, but it involves them recognising their own value, why they're valued. And that notion of going out into a larger world that children have to go through, that liminal phase of moving from childhood into a larger world, is a very, very large shift, a very, very large transition. And their capacity to have relationships and support from those people they respect, those people who are older and around them, very important. Teachers are central to that process very often. Okay, these are the key references that we've used in this week's or this lecture, so they're worth having a look at. Thanks.